Okay, I wanted to touch bases on this particular piece again. This is the Lady Columbia um, lithograph that I have here, and I did a quick go over on this item the other day, and my mother noted that in that video you can't really see exactly the picture and what I'm talking about. And it is an interesting piece. Nonetheless, it is an interesting piece that definitely warrants a little further digging. So that's what I did. So I'll just kind of touch bases on that. What I did is my wife and I were at an estate sale one day, and as I walked in, this was hanging at the estate sale, and I immediately noticed it and was drawn to it, and just found it fascinating. And it has Lady Columbia in it and a World War I soldier. So because it was military related, I was of course interested in it, not knowing anything about it at the time. And as it turns out, I've had it for a while and apparently still don't know much about it until today when I stumbled across something rather fascinating about it. So let me give you a little bit of breakdown about Lady Columbia. Most people, I did a little bit of a poll today at my work and asking random people different ages about Lady Columbia, and to my surprise, nobody knew who she was, which I guess shouldn't be too surprising, but whatever. Anyway, so the Lady Columbia, the term Columbia, was used by Europeans and Americans to describe the Americans, or the Americas, and the New World early on. Its first reference was used in about 1697, but in 1738 it was used to describe America, and it was specifically written about in a Edwards magazine. The Gentleman's Magazine is what it was, and that's when they first started using it as a reference, because everything was under censorship. So they started using the term Columbia in lieu of Americas, because they weren't allowed to print political stuff at the time. Anyway, as time went on and we started settling here on the continent, here in the United States, what would later become the United States, the colonists, they began to feel a little bit of independence and a little bit of identity. Based on a tradition at the time, they normally used Latin names for their regions that they lived in or areas they would inhabit. And so they kind of wanted to keep the tradition, but the name Columbia was the closest they would come to following this custom, and that's what they ended up choosing to use. One of its first uses of the name Columbia officially was used to name a ship, and this particular ship was built in Massachusetts in 1773, called the Columbia Redivia, which later gave its name to the Columbia River, which divides, of course, Washington and Oregon now, and that was done in 1792. It was after the War of Independence. The word or name was officially began to be used in many towns and places as we settled and began to utilize the name Columbia. Then, of course, after the war, in 1801, the territory of Columbia was renamed the District of Columbia. So, as in Washington D.C. District of Columbia. So, as I'm sure you know, lots of places use the term Columbia, and most people don't think much about it. It's just a name to most people today. Let's see, and then there's a song that was used back in early days. There was a song called "Hail Columbia," and at the time they were utilizing that as kind of the de facto national anthem. But nowadays it's used for the entrance march for the Vice President of the United States. And surprisingly, another little interesting thing, that while we use that primarily as the national anthem, "Hail Columbia," it wasn't actually until 1931, an act of people and multiple acts through Congress and attempts, that the Star-Spangled Banner was officially recognized as our national anthem. And I found that rather surprising back when I learned that we didn't even have an official national anthem until 1931. It definitely shows, we're definitely a country with relatively short history in the world. And I was thinking about this today at work. One of the things that crossed my mind was, I'm a veteran of 101st Airborne, and the first commander of 101st Airborne, he told the troops when they first formed, is that we may not have a past, but we have a rendezvous with destiny. And that it kind of embodies the United States of America. We're barely over 200 years old now. And, we don't have a whole lot of past when you start looking at, if you've traveled abroad and you start realizing just how old some of these places are. We're still cruising around in the cradle. But what a hell of a history we've gotten so far. Anyway, it was in the early 1900s, Columbia became visualized as a woman instead of just a name or description of a territory or something like that. It became embodied as a woman. It took on the role of liberty and a national symbol. It was often used in political posters and drawings of the time and things like that to kind of give some kind of something to put your eyes on. And then the image, of course, would let people know that, oh, okay, it's basically a representation of the country. And, of course, then about that time, the Statue of Liberty was given to us in 1885 and unveiled in 1886. And, of course, that's a whole other story with how long it took to get erected and all that routine, but we won't go into that. Anyways, during World War I, the phrase Liberty Bonds was used, and that's kind of where this all started coming apart for Lady Columbia. During World War I, they started selling the bonds, and they were called Liberty Bonds. And it was used during this time, and it slowly replaced Lady Columbia with Lady Liberty, with what we think of today as, by using the Statue of Liberty. And so that kind of phased out Lady Columbia for Lady Liberty. And, the other things that a lot of people think of Columbia, but they don't really know where it came from. It's a lot of things we're really familiar with, like Columbia Records, Columbia Pictures. And then in 1969, the Apollo 11, the command module was named Columbia. And, of course, we can't forget the space shuttle, Columbia Space Shuttle. Sad deal there. And for anybody younger that might be watching this video, still to this day, new things are being using the name Columbia. There's a video game in 2013 called BioShock that it takes place in the city of Columbia. And Lady Columbia is the archangel of the city of Columbia. Anyway, now the most fascinating thing that I uncovered about this piece, which really, really prompted me to make this video, is looking at this piece closely. There was one particular part that just never quite made sense to me, and on the bottom of this is some calligraphy, and I don't know if you can make that out or not, possibly if you're on a computer screen. But there's some calligraphy at on the bottom section of this picture. And then below that, in print, it says, served with honor in the World War and was wounded in action. Now, in the World War, sounds kind of funny, but you got to remember at the time that was the World War. They weren't anticipating a second one, so we didn't have the name World War I or World War II. It was just the World War. And what I found was, did some more research, and that calligraphy there is kind of the key to the whole thing. What this actually is not just a lithograph. What this piece actually is the first rendition, or the very first Purple Heart. And I found that remarkable, absolutely mind-blowing when I realized what I had in my hands. I obviously didn't know that at the time when I got this, but the way it worked out in World War I, the Purple Heart didn't really, the one we think of today, the actual Purple Heart, didn't really come into effect until World War II, and that's what we think of today, and we still, use it to this day. But prior to that, in World War I, this is what you got given when you were wounded or killed in action. The family would be given this, and so that calligraphy that's there is, and you'll have to forgive me, and I'm ashamed to say it, I'm unable to read that because I'm just not good at calligraphy. However, it is the key, because what it is, like on today's Purple Hearts, on the back of the Purple Hearts is the service member's name. And in this case, that calligraphy is this person's name. And this was given to this individual as a de facto Purple Heart of the day. So I guess what I'm saying is this is not just a lithograph. This is actually a form of a medal for being wounded in action or possibly killed in action during World War I. So it's I feel honored to have things like this around, around my home, because they remind me of where this country came from and the things people have fought for to give us the freedoms and liberties we have. And here it is, right here, right in your face. This particular piece was actually given to an individual for being wounded in World War I. And I believe, I swear that says Woodrow Wilson down the bottom right-hand corner, but I'd have to do some further research on that. I hadn't really looked into it a ton because I knew it was Lady Columbia. I got that, and I understood the significance of it, but what I didn't get is what this piece was actually for. You didn't just go down to your local drugstore and pick up this cool picture of Lady Columbia. It didn't work that way. So what I have here is to me, a very significant piece of history. I do know that normally, if you run across a Purple Heart or something like that, every effort should be made to get it back to the family. In this particular case, the family was doing an estate sale, and there was nothing in the house that the family wanted. So this piece probably would have ended up either at Goodwill or in the trash, which is, to me, horrific to think of because, this was an American. This was someone who fought for their country in World War I and was either wounded or killed fighting to defend this country and fight alongside its allies. So anyway, hopefully that kind of clues you in. So if you stumble across one of these, you'll know this particular piece is not just a piece of artwork from the time. This was actually issued from 1914 to 1918, and some are saying 1919, but we'll just say 14 to 19. How about that? We'll just call that even, somewhere in that time frame, because it's a little difficult to find anybody alive that could actually tell you that. So anyway, that is kind of my redo, that now you can see this piece, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I am honored to have it in my home and care for it. And I hope that someday I'll be able to pass it on to somebody else that truly appreciates the history of it and the honor of taking care of a World War I Purple Heart that someone was given. So with that, I'll end this video, and God bless America.